Cool. So wanted to check in on the Postgres 11 rollout. I see Jose starting testing this week. Didn't see any blocker. Brent will announce the date of the upgrade. And then there's one follow-up item we wanted to make sure that we re-enable the 9.6 testing on CI, because I think they were disabled and reduced down to weekly since we thought we were going to be rolling out on 13.0. There's some comments in there on the issue for follow-up discussions. I think Remy was commenting on it, but in absence of any other DRI, I put Mac on there to make sure that this happens. So Tanya, you are the quality representative right now. So something to follow up on to make sure that until we actually upgrade to PG11, we need to make sure that we are continually testing on 9.6.
Next here.
Yep, I'm here. So I caught up with the team. Remy is the DRI, so I can take up the ball in this meeting, but he's on it.
Okay.
I just added another link that we decided looks like we're going to bring the testing back to MR level. So it's MR at the regular scheduled pipelines.
Awesome. Very cool. All right, and we'll keep that on until we actually roll out on PG11. Thank you, everybody. Any questions or any other comments on follow-up items from last week? All right, take that as a note. So moving on to what's been done, met with legal regarding Citus Community. They had an AGPL license, and basically the feedback from legal was this is a non-starter. We just shouldn't even pursue it. So we're not going to. Citus Enterprise licensing also going to be a non-starter. So we will close out our Citus work. We looked at finishing up the testing that we were doing on Citus, but it would be, the estimates were it'd take a couple weeks fully dedicated to finish the testing. The scale would just basically be what data we have from staging, so it wouldn't be a very good comparison. And the results, we expect it to be better in areas where the data is sharded, and we expect it to be worse in data where you would have to do cross-shard joins. So don't think it's a good investment of time, and feel like it may be an apples to oranges comparison, because although Citus does implement sharding, we're not sure if they're doing the same thing under the hood. Probably are if we had to roll our own sharding. So we're just going to pull the plug on testing so that we can focus on maintenance work.
I have one thing. Shall we actually keep the cluster up until we reach a conclusion of whether we are going to abstract the service, or still investigating sharding via the sharding discussion? Because if we still want to kind of, this is it's going to be a data for us to justify if sharding is actually a worse doing at the moment, right?
Yeah.
Because we don't know yet. And I think right now the primary concern right here is sharding and partitioning will give us more scalability, resolve more towards scalability concern than the performance concern. Performance comes second to the scalability. So that's what I'm thinking, if we should keep the environment until we reach a conclusion, whether we go with sharding or not.
I guess I would ask Andreas or Pat. It's not a big deal to just keep the environments the way they are, but I don't think it would be, I don't know how much time it takes to spin up a new environment that would be similar to this. Andreas or Pat, you have any thoughts on that?
We can just stop the instances and leave it go for now.
No, okay. So, yep, we'll leave it. And then also moving on to the next point. So met with various stakeholders. So in the meeting, Camille, Stan, Andrew, database team, talked about concerns with respect to sharding, and talked about some of the alternatives. And based on that hour-long conversation with everybody that was involved, service extraction was a preferred path. And there's the doc, link to the doc, and there's a recording. We're gonna have a follow-up meeting. Sid wanted to get some more information on what type of overhead the service extraction would buy us, and does that paint us into a corner later on. So the example we use, if we only get 5x overhead, and once we actually use all of that overhead, do we then have to shard at that point in time, or are there other alternatives? So we're going to follow up later this week. on that. I know there's probably a lot of questions there. There's a lot of information in that doc and the recording that goes along with. There's a link to the recording in there. But are there any questions on that one?
So quickly on this one, so by service extraction, we're talking about splitting into microservices. Is that right?
Splitting into services, not microservices.
Well,
Yeah.
okay, fine. I was just using the common.
We don't even need to use the micro word.
Okay, okay. I don't like it neither, but okay, just to understand everybody.
We're not
Okay.
building teams around services. We build teams around functionality, and we have services that break out to give good customer experience and proper isolation.
Okay, I understand. So each service then can have its own database and theoretically even different database technologies. My question is,
it would definitely not be different database technologies.
okay.
Yeah.
It would definitely be Postgres.
Okay. Yeah, I would agree with that. I was just from a theoretical perspective. Okay. So my question is, this is a path that I think is very interesting, especially if they're going to have Postgres as a backend anyway, because that does not drive the operational cost exponentially. Now, is there any intention to also consider the custom sharding approach? Because service extraction will take significant development effort and time to implement. And I'm not sure if that will be higher or less than a custom sharding alternative. By the way, both can be also combined and developed at the same time. So it's a very open question.
Just to give some experience on service extraction, it takes approximately 9 months of effort to do a single service extraction in a general, like, start to finish way.
So yeah, there's lots of different approaches to this. And Christopher asked, can we get a rough proposal of which service extraction we should consider first? So there are some that are in flight, like Container Registry and Prefect, that are already, they already have their own database, and I think they're looking at service extraction. And then there are existing services that we are talking about pulling out and extracting into their own, like the CI/CD daemon proposal that's floating out there. And I know there's another one that's slipping my mind right now, but there are various proposals. We haven't taken a rough cut on how much effort any of these would take. And I know that the sharding versus service extraction, there's going to be strong opinions on both sides. So we'll keep iterating on this. We'll get some feedback later on this week in the follow-up conversation. But that's just one to recap on what's been done this week. And we're not in a final decision yet, but this is the one that the stakeholders that were involved in the conversation, this was the consensus. Sharding, I would recommend reading the doc. There were lots of cons that were called out about database sharding and having all tables in one massive database. So
that my previous doc on sharding methods included service extraction, and yes, there are lots of downsides. Also, when considering what service to extract, you have to consider how much of the database load is actually caused by the extraction, would be removed. So how much are you actually gaining on that service extraction? Service extracting something that is 1% of your database load is maybe easy, but also not going to affect us long term. Right. So we have to look at whether even a service extraction, a big enough service extraction, actually buys us anything.
Yep. And that's the main topic of the next conversation, and part of Christopher's question below. And yeah, Josh, I'll get you invited. It'll be fun to schedule based on the distribution of folks invited and availability. So, but once it's settled, I'll get you on there.
I don't have any preference. Actually, if I would ask for the ideal, I would say both at the same time would be the best way to go. Now I'll read the document with calm, and I requested access, and I'll drop some notes if appropriate. I'll just wanted to say that one of the main problems to solve with service extraction, which I'm sure is covered there, I'll drop a note otherwise, is about data consistency. Because once you extract the services, they're independent and they're going to be at best eventually consistent. So that's the main issue that I think we need to be dealing with service extraction. And obviously, what Ben said, we need to extract really fatty services to actually make this worthwhile. But if I would say if there would be unlimited resources, I would say both sharding plus service extraction.
Alvaro, one of the things that was mentioned, which I think is quite important to sort of state in that regard, is that we said one of the criteria for extracting a service is that when you extract it, you have to do it with sharding keys from the outset. So it will be shardable from when we extract it, so that we kind of bring that cost into it, and it kind of pushes the cost, you know, makes it more expensive to extract, which will detract from people just doing it randomly. But also it means that we do almost get two for the price of one, which I think is quite an important point.
Agreed. Very good.
And a practical way of doing that could be to start with partitioning for those services that we extract already, and that gives you the same idea of design for that application. And later on, you can use that to do sharding or whatever.
Yeah.
Because the application is already like sliced correctly.
And if that's the case, I would say directly Postgres 12 for these extracted services. They're going to build from scratch. They can run on Postgres 12, and it's much better in partitioning than 11.
This is kind of a problem.
You bring up another interesting point, which would be really important to get this in the document, in my opinion, just because I've seen in previous lives this become super critical, which is kind of auditing and reconciliation to make sure that like we have consistency, because there's generally, you know, cruft left over from an infrastructure perspective. Andrew, do we have anything like that going on where, you know, like we're double checking on things right now to, you know, validate?
Not that I am aware of.
Okay.
But Andreas might be a good person to ask.
So that might be a good one to add, Craig, just to kind of call out. I mean, it becomes a bigger issue with services when you do service extraction or services with separate DBs. But in general, I think as the system gets larger, we're gonna need that anyways. Like a good example is, you know, if you have things moving over to from SSD to normal hard drives because you're trying to save money, you could end up with them being in both places because, you know, processes fail and those kinds of things. So that's I think that's going to become more common as the system gets more distributed.
Okay. And then, yeah, to Ben's point, I think that was one of the questions I had. Does this working group just become a natural transition into service extraction? So it's going to depend on the outcome of the next stakeholders meeting.
We could change the working group's title for the third time. That's fine. Let's just make progress and get it done.
Okay. Yeah. So I have a concern. I know a lot of people want to join the meeting, but I have a concern that you get too many people in a room and it's hard to come to a decision and a direction going forward. So I will do what I can to invite the right folks, and no offense if you don't get invited, but want to make sure it's an effective meeting. So, all right, any other topics or anything we need to cover? There's a lot of research and a lot of dependent meetings that are going to follow up from this. But yeah, so take a look at the doc, add any comments or questions you may have. But are there any other topics to cover today?
Before the meeting, I suggest everybody just to add as much comments as possible in that doc so the meeting can be effective. I mean, synchronized, asynchronously, as much as possible.
All right. Well, I will let everyone get some time back. Thank you, and look forward to the feedback on the doc.